Hey guys, what is going on? It is me, BakuriBox12 here, and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God ranking video. Now that I've covered weapons, abilities, armors, and rings, I've decided to combine these elements together and take a look at my favorite sets, specifically special themed sets, or ST sets for short. For anyone who doesn't know, STs are items all based around a specific motif, and when all four pieces of the same set are worn at the same time, your character is transformed into a 16x16 sprite and is then given bonus stats that you could only acquire by wearing the whole set. The idea is that STs are usually not meant to be good on their own. It's only when they're united together that they become something worthwhile. And that's mainly what I'm looking for today. Is it better to wear the ST set for a respective class than standard gear? Or at the very least, does it provide an alternate playstyle that is still enjoyable? And the sprite's overall quality will be taken into account. I know a lot of people aren't exactly fans of the 16x16 style. Kinda clashes with Realm's 8x8 look, but on their own, most of these look pretty sweet. We've got 13 sets in total to talk about, so let's get started. Kicking it off at number 13, we've got the Oryx Awesome set for the night. The first ever ST set to be released, and you can kind of tell because unlike all of the other sets, these are just reskins of wine cellar tops, and there are no bonuses for wearing all of the pieces at the same time. Sword of the Mad God is an Acclaim, Onyx Shield is a Colossus Shield, Almandine Armor is Acropolis, and Almandine Ring is Exa HP, and also apparently worth a speed in my mind. Now we do get this really cool looking Oryx sprite that I'm a big fan of. I like how they flipped it around. Instead of being black and red like the traditional Oryx, they made it look a little more like cold steel, with silver and blue-gray tones with black on the inside. It looks a lot more like a suit of armor and is overall less menacing, which makes sense because you are the good guy. I just really wish that this set was its own thing and wasn't just a bunch of reskins. Maybe they can rework it one day. I would love that. So even though this set is technically arguably one of the best sets for the night, it's not really an ST set aside from its category, so it doesn't feel right to me to put it above any of the other ones. Number 12. Swoll Paladin set. The second ST set to be released and the one that introduced us to the Pixie-Enchanted Sword, which is still considered to be one of the best in the game. It takes a similar approach to the Demon Blade, where you have more shots that deal less damage individually, but if all of them manage to hit, then you can deal more damage than a sword with a single shot. Plus, it's great for crowd control, so we're off to a pretty good start. The armor this time around is actually really good. Fairy Plate is a pretty valuable item, granting you 40 health and mana at the cost of only 4 defense from the wine cellar top. A perfect complement to his seal, which not only requires mana to be cast, but also revolves around regeneration and health boosting. And when all the pieces are worn, you're given some pretty sweet stats. 100 health and mana, 5 attack, 30 defense, giving you a well-rounded 60 at max, 5 speed, vitality, and wisdom. This is a very balanced set of bonuses that we're being given. Unfortunately, the seal of the Enchanted Forest is what really holds this back for me. The healing is a little bit less than normal, that's okay. The bonuses are fine, we're still increasing our max HP, but now you hallucinate for a second after casting your ability as a confusing trade-off, I suppose, but it slows enemies when you're nearby, which I could see being pretty fun while rushing. However, the damaging ability of the seal is completely gone. Now, I don't know about you guys, but damaging is a pretty big aspect of what makes the Paladin so effective for me. To take that away from him is a pretty bold move, so you'd better make it worth my while if you're gonna do that. And I don't think that this set does a very good job at making amends to that. Yeah, Pixie Sword is great, but it would be even better if you could buff your damage. And while the bonus stats are a great compliment, they simply fall short of what a regular seal can do. 5 attack, cool, but damaging is way more powerful. 5 wisdom is good because it increases the effectiveness of your seal. But because the Enchanted Forest seal is weaker than a T6, even with that wisdom bonus, the T6 is still better. It just doesn't have enough going on here to justify the subtraction. The sprite doesn't look half bad. I like the neon color palette that they chose, very much in tune with the Candyland aesthetic, but the item combinations don't lend themselves to a playstyle that I think is very lucrative. Number 11. Twilight Archmage set for the Wizard. When you wear all of the pieces, the stats that you get aren't actually that far off from what a standard Wizard set has. 80 health, 5 attack, and 19 defense is kind of like I'm wearing a pyramid ring, where I'm getting 100 health, 4 attack, 4 defense, plus the 13 from my robe. It's also a little bit less mana than a G-Sorc, but we are getting more wisdom and a completely new 5 speed and dex that we wouldn't get otherwise. So mostly better stats, but a couple lesser. The Ancient Spell Pierce is easily the highlight, as it's often considered to be the best spell in the game for its armor-piercing quality, making it great on mid to high defense enemies. The Sentient Staff is where this set sort of flip-flops. You're either gonna love it or hate it. I've learned to tolerate it. You're still getting 2 shots and have the same average average damage as a Wine Cellar top, with even more range, so that's pretty sweet. However, because of the wide amplitude on these shots, if you choose to go on autopilot when firing your weapon, which I often do because it's typically a straight line, you will find yourself missing a lot of your targets because the shots will go around them. The Sentient Staff moves in a much wider double helix shape, with 3 main points of contact being at point blank, mid-range, and long range. You can of course make conscious adjustments to your position to make sure that your shots always make contact, but I won't lie, that does get a little draining. But that's the price that we pay for a set that is basically on par with the standard wizard gear. This one's not too shabby. The sprite's pretty interesting too. Not quite sure what they're going for here. He's got like spider legs, a twig arm, really long face. The proportions are nuts. Number 10. Dragon Tamer set for the warrior. A very novel specimen we have here. We start off with the Indomptable Sword, an extremely slow-moving blade that does a ton of damage that unfortunately has inferior DPS to most swords. The Helm of Draconic Dominance, doing away entirely with both Speedy and Berserk in exchange for a Paladin style effect where you give yourself 250 health and can even paralyze nearby enemies. Zarvox's Heart takes away defense for speed, and the Amulet of Drakefire gives a large boost to your health as well as more speed. The biggest takeaway from here is that your helmet is essentially a completely different item now. The whole Dragon Tamer set is going for a theme of taking away what makes the warrior special, but giving it back in a different way. And if we look at the bonus stats, you can see why. 190 health, not 1 point short of a Deca ring. In combination with the helmet's 250, you can get your warrior's health over 1200 with this. 5 attack is good because he's already got a really high 75, putting him at 80. 27 defense, putting him at over 50 at max. A little lower than normal, but still good for a melee. 26 speed, putting the warrior, a melee class, at 76 base, and 5 dexterity to cap it off. In short, we're losing Speedy to have a higher base ground speed. We lose Berserk for a really hard-hitting sword. We lose a bit of defense, but gain a ton of health. It takes away certain aspects of the warrior and then repackages it to us. And what I really like about this set is how it embraces its novelty. This is not a good set when it comes to DPS. The Indomptable is so slow that even a golden sword can beat it out for about 15 def. But they knew that. That's why they gave you this ridiculous amount of health and speed. You're a Titan. You can run around at high speeds and tank stuff, and probably kill most minions in one hit. It's an empowering feeling. It's a fun set to mess around with, and I appreciate them for following through with that. Sprite's pretty cool though, black and red always pops out. Gold trim is nice too, although he does look a little stiff, I will say. Kinda looks like he's standing on his toes. Number 9. Phylactery Mystic set. This is actually a lot better than I'm giving it credit for. The only reason why it's so low is because I really just don't play Mystic that often. That being said, we got some pretty impressive items and stats to work with. The Phylactery is easily the weakest part. Its damage is only superior to a regular staff until pretty high defense because of its lower rate of fire. It's not terrible, it works. Soul of the Bearer is a pretty good orb though. It's got a pretty high MP cost, but you give Speedy and Berserk to yourself. Average stasis duration, good stats, but also a cooldown so it can't be spammed. Soulless Robe, however, is a very good item, providing you higher defense than the other robes and a substantial health increase. And Ring of the Covetous Heart provides a magical bonus to the class in the form of mana, attack, and wisdom. When the whole set is worn together though, the totals are 110 health and mana, which when combined with the +3 speed is almost the same as a Source Stone. 12 attack, which combines with the Berserk really well. 25 defense, putting you at 50, an absurdly high amount for a robed character. 2 dexterity kind of helps Berserk, 2 vit, alright, and 13 wisdom. Even though I don't play Mystic very often, I have to admit, this is a pretty tempting set to wear. The only thing I don't really like about it is how I have to go Speedy to use my ability. I don't always like needing to do that, and the damage isn't that much better than a standard Mystic set. However, the health, mana, and defense stats are still very impressive. The sprite's really cool too. I love that red hood, and the bottom of the robe kind of looks like the bloody cloak. Number 8. Priest of Geb set, the third ST set to be released based off of Geb from the Tomb of the Ancients. Wand of Geb is a very weak item. It has really low damage and a funky shot pattern that makes it incredibly hard to aim. It can still pierce through enemies, which is good, but this is definitely the weakest part of the set. Book of Geb, on the other hand, is one of the best tomes. Again, I'm not a big fan of needing to go Speedy every time I use my ability, but we get healing, pretty good stats, and we can even remove negative status effects, like the Tome of Purification. Shendit of Geb Geb is a great robe that matches the defense of Soulless, but gives you 25 health and mana as well as 7 vitality and wisdom, which is especially good on those mana-heavy classes, like the Priest. And Geb's Ring of Wisdom, like I said last time, gives a huge boost to the character's wisdom and more health, mana, and vitality bonuses. Altogether, when wearing this set, we get a nice well-rounded 100 health and mana, 10 whole attack to help push up the wand of Geb. I still don't like using it, but it helps. 20 defense, putting you at 45, which again is great for a robed class. 5 speed, putting you at 60, rivaling the Sorcerer. 15 vitality for that HP regeneration, and 20 wisdom to make your tome even better. When comparing it to a traditional Priest set using a tier 5 or 6 tome, the biggest drawback is the one of Geb not having reliable damage. Now on one hand, you could say that the Priest never had great DPS to begin with, so this doesn't affect him a whole lot, but on the other hand, you could say he already has such low DPS, so why make it even worse? I see both sides of it, but as a big support class, Book of Geb is a great tome. You've got substantial defense, good vitality, and great wisdom. And the 100 health and mana helps you not feel like you're missing out on using a health ring. The sprite is very accurate too. It's like a more humanized Geb. I like it. Not bad. Number 7. Skuld 2, the ReGhostening set. For the Rogue. Welcome to the set that brought us the Aetheryte Dagger, a very powerful dagger with very short range that was tailor-made for the Rogue, seeing as how you can go invisible and get right next to enemies, minimizing the problems that low-range daggers bring. The Ghastly Drape is a pretty nice cloak, not too different from the other ones. Bit higher mana cost, same duration, but while you're invisible, you also get speedy for 2 seconds, increasing your rushing capabilities even more. Again, no, I do not like going speedy every time I have to use my ability, but for the Rogue, I can make sort of an exception because he goes invis. It's a lot safer, and in the case of rushing, which the Rogue is the king of, it helps. All the stats that we get are pretty solid too. 130 health, just shy of an Exalted. 40 MP, not bad. 5 attack and dex to make Aetheryte even more powerful. 12 defense, which is pretty low. You're more like a robe class now. But because you're always going invisible, getting hit isn't a huge problem. 4 speed makes you rush even faster. And 4 Vit and Wiz is a nice cherry on top. When compared to a traditional rogue set, Foul, Ghostly, Hydra, maybe a Nile, Pyrrha, Aetheryte is a much better weapon. We're getting more health, almost the same amount of mana, more attack, less defense, 1 less speed than if we were using Ghostly, same amount of dex, and a bit more Vit and Wiz. Now, if you compare the damage of this set to another rogue that is also using Aetheryte, but with a different armor and ring, then the ReGhostening set does fall short a little bit. But this is still a very fine set to use. And of course, the sprite is based off of Skuld, with dagger in hand. Number 6. Horrific Sorcerer set. These items focus on giving the Sorcerer a boost to his damage, defense, and speed, while also reducing his rate of fire, sort of counterbalancing his overall DPS. Abomination's Wrath is an extremely powerful wand, coming at the cost of nearly half the rate of fire and the inability to pierce. The Grotesque Scepter is similar to the Scepter of Devastation in that it deals a large amount of damage on a single target. However, we do get more targets here, sort of reaching a middle ground. The main drawback is that you become hexed on yourself for 1 second whenever you use it, meaning you're also stunned and cannot attack. Since the Horrific Sorcerer set is based off of the Horrific Creation, gives you the same hexing status effect that stepping in the green goo does. The Garment of the Beast is an okay armor, I talked about this before. Both garments and the Horrific Claws supply you with some pretty good stats overall, but they don't get fully realized until you wear the entire set, which grants you 40 health, 100 mana, 16 attack, 25 defense, 15 speed, but minus 8 dexterity. If a sorcerer chose to use Abomination's Wrath with other items, you could beat this one out. However, 25 defense, like with a Phylactery set, is great for a robed character. 15 speed puts the sorcerer at 75, rivaling dagger classes. The DPS is still great, especially when taking the Grotesque Scepter into account, and that sprite is really good. Accurate to the source material, but well adapted for a class. Number 5. Hollow King Necromancer set. This focuses entirely on giving the Necro damage. The Edictum Praetoris has 3 slower moving shots that's good to use at low and high defense enemies. The Memento Mori skull, however, is where we see the change in the Necro's playstyle. This skull does not heal you. Instead, it does 400 raw damage, while also granting yourself damaging for 3 seconds. This is further complemented by the 8 attack from the Toga Picta, and the Interregnum giving us 5 attack. Overall, the stats we get are 100 health, 65 mana, 20 attack, 17 defense, 2 dex, and 20 vit. The Necro is no longer about healing in this case. It plays a lot more like a wizard, actually. The Memento Mori is basically an armor-piercing spell bomb for 400 each time. Your base attack is 95 now. You're not getting any wisdom bonuses, which is kind of a bummer, and your defense is still pretty average, and a 20-point boost to vitality, which is good for the Necro since he maxes lower than others. And while I love giving classes a huge boost in raw damage, it is sort of bittersweet to have the Necromancer unable to heal. It's his trademark, it's his thing. However, I do have to recognize that there is some pretty pretty extraordinary damage happening here. I like the sprite too. It's an old wise skeleton king hunched over. Number 4. Swarming Huntress set. If only for the Nectar Crossfire weapon. This is quite a weapon. 4 shots like Pixie Sword moving in a very strange but controllable arc. Its damage, if all 4 shots manage to land, can even be superior than the Void Bow. And when you wear the whole set, you can do this up to about 20 defense. However, like all multi-shot weapons, the challenge comes from getting within range to land all of these shots. Typically, you do have to sit at point blank range in order to land them all. But even though that's the case, I really love items that put on a spectacle, that give you a lot to look at, whether it be a high number of shots or really fast shots. It helps break up the monotony, you know? The Honeytomb Snare is a fascinating trap as well. It has a very short 3-second lifespan when on the ground, but also a very low mana cost with a very high radius of 7 that slows all enemies within for 3 seconds, meaning you can toss a whole bunch of these on hordes of enemies and slow them all. It's a pitifully low 50 damage, but the purpose here isn't to do damage, it's to slow. Apiary armor I've talked about before. It has alright gear, but the Honey Circlet is basically a weaker Nile, which allows for the total bonus stats to be quite beneficial. 40 HP and MP, just like the ring gives us. 2 attack, 14 defense, which is lower for a leather armor class. 17 speed, okay, now we're getting somewhere. This puts you up to 67, kind of a weird number, but that's a lot. And 20 dexterity. Your rate of fire is now the same as a ninja's katana. I know you gotta get close for it to count, but 4 shots at a really high rate of fire that when aimed properly can do extraordinary damage, and for some reason narrows its shots when you fire an ability, is so cool to me. And once again, I really like the sprite this time around. I couldn't really tell you why, it just looks smooth. Number 3. Akuma Slayer set for the samurai. This is one of the few times where I enjoy the set for mainly the items and not really the stats. The stats are good, mind you. 205 health is great. 40 mana is nice for the samurai to use his ability more. 5 attack, pushing him up to 80. 24 defense is standard. 4 speed is alright, he's at 50 already, so doesn't do a whole lot. And 5 dex, again, he's at 50, so it's a slight increase. Kazekiri is a dual-shot katana that can outdamage the tier 13 Saramune for a little bit, but it's nice to not have to be so rigid with landing your single shot. Ryu's blade is very strange wakizashi. I'm glad that they're being so creative now. The shots come from behind you, they armor pierce. It's got some pretty good range, and the Kamishimo and Akuma's tier provide us with the aforementioned stats. It's a good set. Much like the samurai himself, it's very balanced, and it provides us with a very detailed sprite. He's arming his wakizashi ready to fight, and I always like that hat. Number 2, Lost Golem set for the Trickster. I have not been fair enough to this set. The Carved Golem Remains is a weaker dagger with more range, so kind of like the Sea Sword of daggers. Brain of the Golem is a prism that takes away your teleportation for a longer decoy time that also doesn't move. Golem Garments is seen as the best piece of the set by far, as it provides you 8 whole attack, and the Rusty Cuffs is a nice well-balanced accessory to put on really any class. However, when all of these pieces are worn, I failed to realize that this actually becomes a surprisingly powerful Trickster. 110 HP is already a great start. 18 whole attack combined with 5 dexterity, even better. If you combine this DPS to the regular Trickster gear, Foul, Tier 0 Prism, Hydra, Pyramid, the DPS here is consistently better from start to finish. Only now you have more range. 22 defense added to your 25 at max puts you at 47. 5 speed makes you even faster at 80, and 27 vitality just kind of comes out of nowhere. And I love that sprite. It's my favorite one of the bunch. It looks like an old tattered scarecrow. The one drawback to this set that keeps it from being at number 1 is that there's no teleportation. Brain of the Golem isn't a terrible item. You drop a golem on the ground for 7 seconds, which is really long. It doesn't move, so you can lure enemies in one spot, and when it blows up, they get dazed, which is cool. It's situational, but it has its moments. But without teleportation, you're really not a trickster. You're just an assassin who can clone himself. We still have the extra damage and range, which is easily the best part of the set, but the lack of teleportation prevents it from being amazing. And number 1, the Flesh Collector set for the Assassin. If there was ever a class in the game that needed an ST set to make him better, I'm glad it was the Assassin. I didn't really get to appreciate it when it was on testing because I wasn't maxed, but the Symbiotic Ripper Dagger provides better DPS than the standard daggers through and through. Plus, at a higher rate of fire, yeah, the projectile speed is lower, but it's still good damage. Parasitic Concoction has lower damage and lower radius, but it curses enemies, making your dagger even more powerful when you hit them. Rags of the Host is sort of a weaker garments, 6 attack but 15 def, and the Hivemind Circlet should just be called the Assassin Ring, because it gives you mana, wisdom, and attack. When all 4 pieces are worn, you get 50 health which isn't much, I'll admit. 200 mana, almost 2 additional poison throws, 15 attack pushing you to 75, 15 defense, which for leathers isn't very high, so you gotta be careful, and 5 wisdom. Not the biggest wisdom bonus you could have had, but it's nice. Here's why this is incredible though. When you put these numbers into the DPS calculator, the assassin beats out the wizard in terms of DPS. But you know what? He's a mid-range character. He's supposed to be a little bit stronger when it comes to his weapon. But he also beats out the warrior, unbuffed of course, for most lower defense enemies. If a paladin was to self-buff, he would only be beating out the assassin a little bit. If they both receive the buff, the assassin wins by a long shot. And the sprite, while not my favorite, it's pretty rad. Big ol' zombie dude. But even though the assassin is far from my favorite class in the game, the reason why this is my favorite ST set is because it was able to take a class that many consider to be the weakest link in Realm and made it way better. Out of all the ST sets in the game, this one is by far the most transformative, and that's what puts it at number 1. If we can get more STs like this, Realm's gonna be in good shape. So those are my favorite special themed sets in Realm of the Mad God. That's all I've got to say for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. All right. See ya.